Daylight found the black Gull sour. It lay hard across the open deck, too bright for what the night had left behind. Spilled rum tacky between the planks, guttered lanterns hanging crooked from the shrouds, cups on their sides, dice glittering in the seams, and bodies sleeping where the celebration had burned itself out. Corvin woke against a barrel near the mainmast, exactly where Adrian had left him. One girl was slumped against his uninjured side. The other had folded half across his lap sometime before dawn, red hair tangled over his coat and the planks. His forearm bandage had bled through again and dried stiff. His neck ached. His mouth tasted of bad rum and old smoke. For one thick second he did not move. Then memory came back. Lantern light. Laughter, Adrian's face, Adrian turning away. That woke him the rest of the way. He shoved himself upright hard enough to spill the red-haired girl sideways with a sleepy curse. He barely heard her. The sun was already too high. The ship should have been fully alive by now, loud with rope, boots, curses, and work. Instead, the deck sounded wrong. No proper call from the bow, no easy exchange from the watch, only scattered movement, a groan from someone waking half-dead with drink, and the dull drag of a ship that had slept past the hour it should have trusted. Then the cry came from forward. Not a full alarm at first, a torn, startled sound, the kind a man makes when fear reaches him before language does. Corvin was on his feet before the second cry. This one found words. "Captain!"
The deck lurched awake around him. Men jerked upright. A cup rolled. A loose lantern chain rattled in the wind. Corvin crossed the wreckage at a run, shoving through bodies and casks, one hand yanking his sword belt straight as he moved. A deckhand stood on the forecastle, white-faced and pointing. Corvin looked. One bow watch lay crumpled beside the forward bitts, throat opened cleanly. The second was down by the rail, folded against a coil of line, one hand hanging limp over the planks. Blood had dried dark around both wounds, hours old. Corvin crouched only long enough to know what mattered. No struggle worth naming, no drawn blade, no wasted cuts. Clean, fast, deliberate. Then he lifted his head. No Adrian. He turned once, scanning the deck, the foremast, the hatch, the rail, the place by the mainmast where Adrian had stood before walking away. Empty. That was the real blow. Something in Corvin's face went flat and cold. He did not raise his voice, but the words struck hard enough to still the deck. Turn the ship out. Every berth, every hatch, every locker. Count every man. The quartermaster was already there, boots half buckled, face set hard, already turning men with one sweep of his hand. "I'll take it." Corvin nodded once. Do it, but this was never a hiding job. They took him off the ship. He stepped to the bow rail and looked down at the dark strip of water under the hull. A small boat could have ridden there unseen while the deck roared over itself. Chosen minute, chosen target. He turned back. "Wake every harbour eye we own. Quay boys, net menders, wharf porters, tavern doors. I want every fool who saw a skiff, a cart, or 3 men moving too early brought to me now."
The crew scattered. The quartermaster was already driving them into order, naming pairs, setting routes, making the deck obey before panic could. Corvin let him. Motion mattered more than blame. He looked once toward the place where Adrian had left him the night before, and knew with sudden, clean cruelty that he had felt the deck go soft and let the night keep him there anyway. A runner came back faster than he expected, barefoot and gasping. "Lower East Quay. Fishlad at the netter's step saw 3 hooded men at first light. Thought they were hauling a drunk till a sleeve slipped. Wrists were bound." Corvin moved at once.
Direction. Off the steps, through Fish Market Lane, towards Salt Widow Cut. Hooked in with me. The quartermaster stepped in close. Take more men. No, too many boots and the shore shuts its mouth. If it's bait, it's already bait. He dropped into the skiff with Hook Team and shoved off hard. The Black Gull fell behind them in a stink of stale victory and daylight shame. By the time they hit the quay, Greymark had already put its morning face on. Fish guts in the gutters, women shouting over wet baskets, smoke hanging low. The harbour had swallowed dawn under trade, noise and filth. Corvin came off the steps like a drawn blade. A fishwife at the next stall hissed to another, too loudly not to be heard. That's him, that's Black Gull's devil. Took the Harrow boy right off the water, they say. A porter crossed himself. Somewhere behind them another voice muttered, "A duke's son in pirate hands. If they can take him, what chance has any honest man?" The quay boy pointed with a fish knife still in his hand. 3 cloaks, one between them, limp. They kept him wrapped close. Did he speak? No. Did he fight? The boy swallowed. No. Head kept falling, like he was asleep. Drugged, Corvin thought, or half gone. He pressed the boy for the route. Fish Market Lane, the Cooper's Wall, Salt Widow Cut, then a back run by the rope walk. At the far end, a lighter man admitted one of the cloaked men had paid him silver not to look. Silver for silence over a common drunk. That told Corvin more than the man knew. The trail carried them to a narrow warehouse cut behind the salt sheds. In the damp gloom of a room used in haste and abandoned clean, Corvin found restraint marks against a plank wall, rope fibers on the floor, a bitter medicinal trace still clinging to the air, and a dark coat button he knew at once. Adrian's. He closed his fist around it. At the rear shutter, a black slip of water showed fresh scrape marks where a boat had pushed off. One of Hook Team looked to the channel. Back to water. Corvin looked once, then shook his head. No, they took him from water. That's why they want us thinking water. This is a handoff, not a hold. He stepped back into the alley and looked inland, toward the part of Greymark that wore stone respectability over its rot. He said, they changed shape here, boat to land, hidden to ordinary. He split his men fast, one pair to ask after carts hired before the bells, one to the lower road, one with him. Then he turned toward the city and kept moving. Adrian woke to stone, lamp oil, and the bitter ghost of the cloth still clinging to the back of his throat. The room sat in the lower level of an old bonded store near the inner channels, the kind of building that had once kept ledgers, customs tallies, and seized goods behind thick walls and locked doors. Time had stripped the trade from it, but not the shape. It still felt built to hold things that mattered and did not belong in the open. Not a dungeon, not a pit, something more deliberate than that. A room meant to keep a valuable thing contained, intact and quiet. A narrow bed stood against lime-washed stone gone damp with age. A chair waited beside a table scrubbed so clean it felt hostile. Along one wall, old shelves built for ledgers or records stood mostly bare. High above, a single slit window admitted a pale wash of afternoon light that never reached the corners. His boots were gone. His coat was gone. Anything sharp had been removed. His wrists were free, which meant they trusted the room more than they trusted rope. He sat up slowly, let the last sick looseness of the drug pass him through, and began to take measure. Moisture sweated faintly through the walls. The air carried mildew, cold stone, and the stale trace of old paper and extinguished flame. Somewhere beyond the masonry, water moved close enough to be heard only when the building settled. Temporary quarters, chosen, not improvised. By the time the latch turned, he was standing. Lady Sebastienne Vale entered with a lantern in one hand and a folded paper in the other, as if she had been expected and the room had been arranged to flatter her patience. She shut the door behind her, set both items on the scrubbed table, and let the low gold of the lantern gather over the chair, the bare shelves, the damp stone, and Adrian himself. "You made the arrest." Vale's brows lifted a fraction. "You open quickly. You dragged 6 of Corvin's men under a trap under my name. That is not subtle enough to require a warm-up. You sound very certain. It bore my seal, it did not bear my hand." Vale unfastened one glove finger by finger, an inconvenient distinction. "You know I did not write it." "Do I?" "Yes, because if I had, you would not be here deciding how much I'm worth alive."
That checked her for a beat. Then she smiled. "Names are often worth more than men." Adrian looked at the folded paper and nowhere else. The language was close enough to fool a gate sergeant. A correction like that comes from someone who knows exactly how little must be altered to make honest men ruin one another. Vale leaned back slightly. "You sound almost proud." "No, only unsurprised." "By what?" "That this began closer to home than the key." Vale rose and came around the table slowly. "You wanted Corvin to take me." Her mouth curved. "You do like assigning intention to other people's intelligence. You forged my name into the first trap. You put my seal under it. That is intention enough." "It was your seal and your paper," she said lightly. "If you object, your quarrel may lie closer to home than to me." A small, fast flicker passed through her eyes. Adrian saw it, and this time he knew he had touched something real. "The Crown must be more desperate than I thought, though perhaps desperation is what comes of spending too many years proving the Black Gull cannot be taken by force." Vale's expression cooled. "People say many foolish things when they live too near the water." "Yes," Adrian said, "and Stone Throat was not built to prove them wrong. You built it to turn him. Delay, witnesses, noise. You wanted him victorious at exactly the wrong moment. You enjoy hearing yourself solve things." "No," Adrian said. "I enjoy hearing where people stop denying them." Vale's mouth curved faintly. "The news of Black Gull's kidnapping of a duke's son is already in London, and once they hear a Harrow seal helped put his 6 men in chains, the story will turn ugly. Tell me, Adrian, when it does, who do you think they'll blame?" Adrian stayed silent. He knew crowds didn't choose sides, they chose stories, and stories needed someone to hang. She stepped closer, close enough that the lantern painted one side of her face gold and left the other in shadow. Then, almost idly, she said, "You really do look like her." Adrian went still. Vale watched the stillness with the patience of a woman taking a measurement. "The eyes first," she said. "That same pale, watchful brightness, as if the room has already disappointed you. And the mouth. Mina always looked as though she had just decided not to say the cruel thing she was perfectly capable of saying." Adrian's voice came back colder than before. "No one calls her that." "No one now," Vale said. "But before Mina Belmont learned to wear Harrow like an armor, she answered to it easily enough." She studied him with unnerving calm. "She was beautiful in a way men mistake for softness. Fair skin that made candlelight look warmer than it was. That white gold shine in her hair whenever the sun found it. Everyone noticed the gentleness first." Vale's smile sharpened. That was their mistake. Adrian said nothing. He knew better now. Every word was a probe. "She had a habit of making foolish things sound important.
old verses, children's tales, sea legends copied into prettier bindings because she could not bear to see them in cheap print. She would defend nonsense as if it were scripture. Tell me, did she still favor that childish line about the drowned lamp leading sailor home? Adrian answered too fast. A wisp, he said, not a lamp. The correction landed between them. Adrian heard a heartbeat too late and changed tack. You speak of her as if you trusted you. Not the book, only its shadow. Adrian let a beat pass before answering. You speak of her as if you trusted you. For a time. And you repay that trust by dragging her son into a locked room and trying to make him flinch. Not trying, Vale said softly. Watching. That was too honest by a hair. Adrian heard it and cut back at once. You are measuring me. Vale's smile did not move, but her eyes sharpened. Of course. Not for guilt, Adrian said. You already know where the paper came from, or near enough for your purposes. You're measuring memory. The silence tightened. Vale reached for the lantern, but not before Adrian saw that he had landed one. Mina was always weakest when something absurd had caught her heart, a rhyme, a keepsake, a scrap no sensible woman would save. She could never bear to let a thing die simply because wiser people thought it worthless. Her gaze held his. I wondered whether she had passed that weakness to you. Adrian's pulse struck once, hard, but he kept his face still. No, he said quietly. What she passed to me was the habit of noticing when someone circles what she does not possess. For the first time, Vale's composure showed its teeth, and this time she did not hide them at once. Well, she said, lifting the lantern, now I know which part of her still opens you. Adrian snapped. You know nothing. I know enough, Vale said. The paper angered you. Mina wounded you. The old verses made you answer without thinking. That is useful. She took up the folded paper and moved to the door. At the threshold, she paused without looking back. Whatever else can be stolen in this world, Adrian, resentment keeps beautifully. Then she left him alone with the damp stone, the bare shelves, and the sickening knowledge that he had not been the only one drawing blood. Vale did not stop walking until the corridor narrowed into older stone. The holding rooms had been cut into the lower level of the house long before anyone called it a warehouse. Thicker walls, fewer windows, a place made to keep things quiet and useful. At the end of the passage, she pushed open a second door. The room beyond had once been used for records. Empty shelves lined one wall. A warped ledger sat forgotten under dust. A single candle guttered on a table beside an untouched cup. Roderick Prince stood beyond the candlelight, not in the dark exactly, but just outside the place where brightness became inspection. He looked up when she entered. Well, no, Vale said. He did not break. Roderick's hand rose briefly to the side of his jaw, 2 fingers brushing the line of his face as if checking the features there still held. Did he bend? Vale said, he listened. That is usually worse. Vale set the lantern on the table. The light widened. Roderick shifted half an inch out of it. The movement was so smooth it might have passed for ease, but it did not. The prisoner knows the shape of the paper trap. Not all of it, enough. Roderick gave a small nod. He would. The prisoner also knows the hand was not his. Of course. Vale studied Roderick. There was always something faintly over-arranged about him, as though composure cost him effort. The prisoner corrected himself once. That was useful. Roderick's attention sharpened. On what? On a nursery thing. Old sea nonsense. He knows more than he meant to show. There it was again, not greed, urgency. Roderick's gaze dipped to the folded paper in her hand, then rose again. And the missing portion. He did not give it to me. Roderick quickly added, yet. Vale removed one glove and laid it on the table. You sound optimistic. I sound practical. No, you sound invested. A thin amusement touched his mouth. Coming from you, that is almost charming. Vale ignored it. The book is with me. The boy's memory is not. The cipher is with you. For now, that is sufficient. Roderick looked at the lantern flame for one brief second too long, then away. For now, he said. Vale let the room go quiet, then said very lightly, "The captain is already moving." That found him. Something in him drew taut enough for her to see it. So soon? Yes, Vale said. I always assumed he kept eyes on the land. By the time the truth limps its way to London, the city will already have chosen the cleaner story, and in that story, Vane is not a man to be hunted, he is a man to be displayed. Roderick asked, "Did he look angry?" "Cold," Vale said. Then, after a beat, "I did not expect the captain and Harrow to become inconveniently useful to one another so quickly." Roderick was silent. Vale's mouth tightened. "It changes nothing," she said. "I know how to adjust." "Will he be hurt?" Vale looked at him, not because of the question itself, but because of how quickly it came. "You ask with unusual care," she said. Roderick's mouth moved in the suggestion of a smile. "You built your trap around him. I'm asking whether it still has teeth." "It does." "Good." The words sat wrong in the room. Vale tucked the folded paper into her sleeve. "You will have your part when I am ready. I would prefer it before then. You will prefer what I tell you to prefer." That won a small breath from him, almost a laugh, almost irritation. "There she is," he said. Vale stepped closer to the table. "Listen carefully. I need the boy pressured, not broken. I need him uncertain, not useless. We are done with delays. I will not have this dragged sideways by sulking men, wounded captains, or your private appetites." Roderick went still, and tellingly did not ask which private appetites she meant. She lifted the lantern, the flame flared behind the hood, and for one instant something near Roderick's mouth seemed to misalign before the light shifted and hid it. "One warning," she said. "Do not take private interests where I have placed public machinery. I dislike overlap. It leads to mess." For the first time, Roderick's reply came a fraction late. "You flatter yourself. I am interested in outcomes, not men." Vale opened the door. "Yes," she said. "That is why you asked whether Vane would be hurt." She left before he could answer. Behind her, the room fell mostly dark. Roderick stood motionless until her footsteps climbed out of hearing. Then he raised his hand to his own mouth, not in vanity, but in concentration, as if reminding himself where it ended. The lane ended at a warehouse front, too plain to be noticed. Old brick above, heavy timber below, a bonded store once built to keep ledgers, seized goods, and inconvenient things behind thick walls and locked doors. The rear entry stood half shut. The bolt had been thrown back in haste. Corvin pushed it open. The lower room struck him at once with the wrong kind of certainty. Not a common storehouse, not a cargo cellar. Something more deliberate than that. A place made to keep a valuable thing contained, intact and quiet. Lime-washed stone, gone damp with age. A narrow bed against the wall. A chair beside a table scrubbed so clean it looked hostile. Along one side, old shelves built for ledgers or records, most of them stripped bare. High above, a single slit window letting in the last pale wash of day that never reached the corners. The room was empty. Not long abandoned empty, not harmless empty, the kind that still held the shape of the man taken from it. Moisture sweated faintly through the walls. The air carried mildew, cold stone, and the stale trace of old paper and extinguished flame. Somewhere beyond the masonry, water moved close enough to be heard only when the building settled. Corvin crossed it in 3 strides. A stool on its side, rope fibers on the floorboards, raw marks at wrist height against the far wall. And near the bed, half caught under itself as if torn free in haste, Adrian's outer coat. Corvin picked it up. There was blood on the shoulder. For a brutal instant he could not breathe. The room still held Adrian's shape, and Corvin had reached him by arriving after he was gone. At the rear, the shutter stood open. Fresh scrape marks scored the stone below it where a boat had pushed off in haste. Corvin stood there with Adrian's blood on his hands and the certainty of him everywhere. He had found the place. He had only found it too late.